January is usually the reading month for me where I end up reading so many books that I can't remember the plot of the first book by the time I finish the last book. But this January I wanted to consciously slow down. And I think I might have slowed down like a little bit too much. I mean, it's fine. I enjoyed what I read and I had a pretty good reading month, but I read 5 books. Usually I would have read a little bit more than that, and I possibly would like to pick up the pace a little bit because there's so many books that I want to get through, and that excitement overwhelms my want to slow down at times. I kind of need to balance it. I need to balance all the books I want to read with the idea of slowing down and reading them with more intent and absorbing more of them. Anyway, I read 5 books. Let's talk about what they are. The first book I read on my Kindle, and that is Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This is the sequel to Divine Rivals, which is a historical fantasy romance set in a World War I inspired environment and period of history. We are following 2 writers who are wanting to be war correspondents and report from the front line for their newspaper. They're also in a slight love-hate romancy situation building. I wouldn't say it's enemies to lovers, it was kind of pinned as enemies to lovers. I would say it's like vague annoyances to lovers, but it's a fun time. I'm not going to really go into details about book 2 because I don't want to spoil book 1, but this series is filled with big epic moments. It's filled with moments from the front line of this war. It's got the romance there. It's got magic typewriters, which I quite enjoyed hearing about. My flaw for this series in general, and something I hoped book 2 would change but it didn't really, is that it doesn't really go into the fantasy element as much as it could. For a book that is primarily set in a fantasy world with a fantasy war of the gods happening, you don't really get much behind that. I don't feel like there was enough world building and enough explanation of the fantasy system. Like, there were little bits mentioned, like there was mention of a magic car, but we never got to understand why it was magic, how it was magic. Like, we didn't get enough detail about each thing that was magic. It was just kind of mentioned, and there was mentions of ley lines, and the War of the Gods got a little bit of a backstory to it, but overall I feel like it could have dived into that a little bit more, and for me that was probably what let it down for me, because it felt like it was just a historical fiction with a couple of fantasy elements, as opposed to it being a I've just made that. As opposed to being a fantasy historical fiction, it felt like it was just kind of 2 separate things that vaguely touched towards each other at times. But I did really like it, and I did really like the romance and the characters and the found family element of it, and I think that it did a really good job of having that kind of tension and that epicness merged in with that romance and that hope and the relationships in it as well. So I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Burnout by Sophie Kinsella. I feel like this one came to me at the right time. This is a contemporary about a woman who is just feeling completely burnt out at work. She is not happy with the position that she's in, the situation she's in. She's getting a lot thrown at her, and she ends up having a little bit of a breakdown because of that, and goes to the seaside town of her childhood to just have a bit of a break, except the town isn't quite what it used to be. It's a little bit run down, it's off season, so she ends up kind of wondering if she's done the right thing, and cue the love interest, who is there for fairly similar reasons. They're both burnt out and they both get to know each other. It's a grumpy sunshine kind of, I mean, more grumpy and like slight sunshine. I wouldn't say she's full on sunshine, but we've got that kind of trope going on. It's quite funny at times. It had the light relief, but also I think what I loved about this book is that it really did talk about mental health and burnout and how repairing and healing ourselves is different for everybody. Initially, the main character in this is following these steps to become relaxed and like have self-care and do all of these things for herself, and it's just this list that just doesn't work for her, and she's trying to do it and it's not doing anything, and she's not really doing the list properly anyway, and it's just not working. And I love the fact that we have that, because it just shows that that wasn't right for her and something else is right for her to help her have that relax and reset. And I really like that conversation, as well as the love for this small town and everybody's support and want for this town to succeed. I really liked that. There was so much heart in this, and it felt so wholesome, and I feel like I just read it at the perfect time. I did do a reading vlog for this. I actually also did a reading vlog for Ruthless Vows. I'm not doing a very good job of plugging my other videos. If you would like to see my Ruthless Vows reading vlog, it is spoiler free. I will link it up here. If you would like to see my reading vlog, which again is spoiler-free for the Burnout and just generally a little bit of a mental health talking type of vlog, I will leave that linked up here as well. I gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's been a pretty good month so far. Then I read The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This is translated by Stephen Snyder. I had really high hopes going into this. The concept of this is that there is this world, or this island that people are living on, where things are randomly erased from the island and from their memories, and it's just removed. So for example, perfume. One day perfume's there, it exists, you have it, you use it, and then the next day it's just kind of gone. And that becomes more and more extreme as the book goes on. I thought that this would go into that kind of dystopian side of it a little bit more and poke about with the why and the what a bit more, and we just didn't get that. And I left having way more questions than I went into it with. And I don't like it, I think, when a book for me is open-ended and unsatisfactory like that. I know that for some people that might be an enjoyable way to read and it keeps them guessing, but for me, I have realised that I do kind of need some kind of resolution. And I just didn't really feel like I got that. I just had so many I still have so many questions. Why? How? Like, what about references to things in books and stuff? Like, it touched a little bit on these kind of things, but it just didn't fully go into it. It felt more like it was literary and just about the experiences rather than anything else and like the system itself, which is really what I wanted from it. It was written really beautifully and it did flow really nicely, but it just didn't quite click for me. So unfortunately this one was a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Then I went on to read Impossible Creatures by Catherine Rundell. This was for me reading the Waterstones prize winners for 2023 and another vlog that is also linked above if you would like to watch that. I really like this one. This is a fantasy middle grade following a young boy who ends up discovering this magical land called the Archipelago, which is these hidden islands in which the mythical creatures and stories that we all think are mythical are actually real, and they exist, all the creatures are there, and this kind of magic is slowly being drained and dying, and the creatures aren't doing very well, the land isn't doing very well, and it's up to this boy and a girl he meets with a flying coat to work out what's happening, really. And I suppose it's part of a much wider story because I assume this is going to be a series. This is the introductory story to all of this and kind of setting up what's happening, who the characters are. I mean, I'm really hoping it's a series. I did say this when I was reviewing it as well in the actual video. I need to check. I just need to Google it, but I think it's a series. This fantasy element was just great. I really loved learning about all these creatures and seeing all these creatures. You really get to see so many of them and they're so cute, and there's such heart behind this. There's the kind of crew element, like this crew that they build together to be able to try and achieve what they're trying to achieve. I love the flying coat. I really want a flying coat. That's such a fun concept. The idea that you could just put this coat on and just go for it. I just think that's great. So many parts of this were so much fun. It wasn't afraid to pull its punches as well, or it wasn't pulling its punches. It was definitely hitting hard in places, which I liked. It had the emotion to it. It was very funny in places. I really liked the conversations and the way the characters interacted with each other. I thought it was a really fun time and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And then finally, I read In Memoriam by Alice Wynne. This book, completely out of my reading comfort zone, but this is the Waterstones novel of the year. It is following 2 young men who are at school and in the time of the start of World War I. One of them, his mum is German, and he ends up kind of being pushed to enlist in the war to take any heat off of his family and show that they are patriotic to England. It also follows his friend who ends up enlisting as well, to be with him on the front line. Now these 2 are on a journey throughout this horrible experience of being on the front line and being in the middle of World War I. They also have feelings for each other that they haven't really admitted and that they can't really admit, and it's got that element to it as well. So we're dealing with these 2 different stories here merging together, and oh my gosh, the brutality of this book and the way that it depicts World War I listened to this as an audiobook, and one of the things I think was just so emotionally powerfully done is that there was lists read out of the in memoriams of people that had passed away or been injured in the war, and the way the audiobook did that is it had different names coming out of the left ear in the headphones and different names coming out of the right ear in the headphones, all at the same time, echoing over each other for like a good 30 seconds to a minute of the audiobook regularly, and it was just so powerful. Like, it obviously, like, knowing that this all happened and how awful it was, it captures that desolation with balancing it with the kind of hope for these 2 guys and how they feel about each other and wanting them to have the freedom to have those feelings and to embrace those feelings. And it just, oh god, I can't say enough about this. I thought it was utterly beautiful, so emotional. It showed the fear, it showed the pressure, it showed the terror, and it showed this romance and the love between these 2 guys. And oh yeah, I thought it was great. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. So those are all the books I read in January. A pretty good reading month. 4 out of the 5 books were all above 4 stars. I feel like I'm just getting better at picking the books that I want to read that I think I'm going to enjoy. Although saying that, these two, I literally read them because of the video for Waterstones Books of the Year. So these two I might not necessarily have picked up. I definitely wouldn't have picked up In Memoriam. I might have picked up Impossible Creatures, but I'm not really sure. So these two, I mean, I'm really glad that I liked both of these as much as I did. I think the Burnout was probably my favourite read of the month because it just hit in a really relatable way for me when I was reading it, of that kind of the pressures and how to balance those pressures and how to look after yourself. So I read a lot of great books. I read a lot of great books. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you in the next one.